So today is a special day. I am so excited to have this very important and honestly really interesting and even fun conversation with Sarah Lloyd Favaro, who owns and is CEO and founder of Learn Bold Responsible AI. Sarah, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Sheryl.
Of course. And so, we've all obviously heard about AI, and companies seem to feel like they're all getting involved in AI and maybe getting left behind if they don't. And
Mm.
I think we know that there's good things with AI. We've used AI, but there's also some circulating fear about AI, at least what I'm hearing. What does it mean to me? What does it mean to my job? So it can be a little scary in a way, to be honest, because it's kind of there's a lot of unknowns. And
Yeah.
so today we're going to talk about mitigating the bias for women in AI. So before we get started, though, can you jump in and let us know why you're so interested and also why you decided to become an expert on this topic?
Sure. I've always been at the intersection of technology and learning throughout my career. I've just, found technology fascinating, always wanted to make my life easier or make other people's lives easier. So I always, was interested in all the new tools and the bells and whistles, and then adopting these new things into my workflows and just my personal and professional lives to try to, you know, make advances in what I could do with the tech. So when AI came out, I really didn't know I was using it when I first was working for this company, a software as a service company. And the developers of that company were using it, the predictive AI. And I later learned, that we were using it behind the scenes. And then I eventually got more educated about data science and machine learning and artificial intelligence through just some upskilling of myself. And then now, in the past 2 years, there's been the explosion of everything with generative AI due to ChatGPT coming out and just being so widely known, just by everybody. So that's kind of how I got into it, just understanding the potential and just playing around with the tools myself and seeing, oh my gosh, this is actually, it is kind of magical, like the things that it can do for you. But then understanding that in that magic and these new abilities, there are some things that we need to be aware of. And there possibly could be risks. So to just even as a user, I think there's so many things that we have available to us that we use on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis that we don't necessarily know are being powered by AI. So I think it's just educating oneself about the tech that you're using and to the best of your ability, and then trying out some of these new AI tools that are available and seeing what works for you and how to adopt them. But of course, being aware of the responsible usage of these tools, which is where my work comes in. And so we can talk a little bit more about that. But part of one of the big unique points of using AI is that the data that it typically uses can be biased. And so that creates some outcomes that are biased. And some of those outcomes might be biased against certain groups of society, such as women or other, groups of different um, colors or coming from different countries. So it's just something to be aware of and have a very skeptical eye when using AI technology.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. And so, what does this mean for organizations? It's one thing for us as individuals to have a not a skeptical view, but maybe a analytic view
Mm.
of and really thinking through this. But what does it mean for organizations, and how can leaders really mitigate bias for women in AI, and also too for women who are further marginalized?
Sure. I think the biggest thing that leaders can do in organizations is to upskill their workforce. Jobs will be changing so drastically because the tasks are going to be changing, and AI has already taken over a lot of the mundane and monotonous tasks that we do on a day to day basis. So we want to be able to not only transform the work through the tasks, but also transform the workers and the workforce so that we really are capitalizing now on perhaps the additional time that we may gain from using AI, which gives us productivity gains, and also just across the board giving everybody the opportunity to learn and take advantage of these AI powered tools, systems, platforms, or technologies. And I think typically we've seen, I haven't seen the latest statistics, but the females in the AI realm are typically, it's not a 50-50 split between males and females. Typically, females are, behind in that percentage. And so we want to continue to make sure that women are trying out these tools, they're testing them, they're not lagging behind, because I think, it's really going to become more and more part of the fabric of how we
Mhm.
work and how we live. So that's what I would say to leaders is they need to, provide that democratic access and upskilling to their entire workforce. And they need to have a very they need to plan this out and have a strategic vision of how that will play out and how they are going to incorporate AI into that strategic plan, and then how they're going to help transform their workforce depending on the different verticals and
Mhm.
who's doing what in order to adapt to that new reality.
That's really interesting. It seems like it could be coming a new CXO role, Chief AI Officer, might be coming down the pipe soon.
I
And
think, yeah, a lot of the bigger companies definitely already have that. I think it's more, where the space where I sit are these medium to small businesses that, maybe know what's coming down the pike, but they don't quite know or have the resources necessarily to have an AI group that's, 100% dedicated to incorporating AI into their
Mhm,
organization, but they still need to perhaps have an individual leading that, and then having different people come to the table. A very diverse group of people needs to be sitting at the table to make decisions based upon the AI technologies available to them.
mhm. Yeah. And so when you were saying that, I love that you said, democratic access and to upskill
Yeah.
everyone. If I were to say, and I might be asking you an impossible question, but if I were to ask you, so when it comes to upskilling, what's the one or two most important things that are most vital to do first?
Yeah, I actually, have been a learner myself, and even though I feel really adept with technology, one of the things that was most helpful to me is that with AI, you typically hear it's a black box, especially when dealing with large language models and natural language processing. You kind of don't know what's happening in that black box, and
Mhm,
I don't think we all need to be AI engineers or to necessarily, understand the underpinnings. And quite frankly, I think we would all need to go back to school and do a lot of learning for that. But I think what's important is to understand how you can create applications or tools, even, very basic chatbots, and going through the motions of building one of these with no code, where there are a lot of no code tools out there, really crystallizes what it is and how, AI is more of a conversational technology, because it is based upon language. So understanding how to communicate with the models that are powering these tools, that's really almost the most important point. And once you understand that, you realize that, you know, just like communicating with an individual or a group or at work, you know, the better communicator you are, the better results you typically get. So that is the same for AI technology. And that's something that was kind of an aha moment for me. Understanding that that was kind of the key to getting these tools and technologies to work even better. So there's a lot of ways of going about that. But I would say, you know, building your own chatbot, again, no code is required, but to go through the motions to really kind of demystify what this is in simple terms is really helpful.
Yeah, that sounds really great. And as you were talking, it seems like also whether it's executive communications or communications in general, it seems like
Mhm.
that the AI communications that you're talking about should really be wrapped into that. So, you know, perhaps, you know, whoever is in charge of the exec com or something like that
Mhm.
can help with initial education. And then it also sounds like an internal chatbot can be
Mhm.
really helpful, perhaps for people to ask questions and you
Yeah.
know, and what have you. So,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there are lots of ways to leverage it, and you know, obviously large companies are already doing that. And um I think it's, you know, but understanding, you know, kind of the infrastructure behind it from, you know, a basic level is really great. I think just to give you that insight as to, okay, this is, you know, not something so esoteric that I can't grasp it. And then you start to understand, okay, these are just, you know, the communication skills are so important. And of course, those tools will allow us more time to do some of the more human activities that are going to become more and more important as well. So it's kind of interesting in that way. That communication, I think, will be, you know, one of our number one top skills that will be needed going forward.
yeah. So really having that under and maybe even being explicit about it at the time when people are moving around and shifting roles and things are there's a lot of movement in technology right now for better for worse.
Mhm.
And also just maybe being explicit about gaining that knowledge in AI communication and being very explicit about whether it's on your LinkedIn profile or in your
Mhm.
own internal and external communications that you do have that language and that
Right.
you know you do understand that communication. So for everyone listening, if I were and again, you have such a wealth of knowledge, I almost feel like it's a disservice to ask this question. So if you want to know even more, you should reach out to Sarah personally. But I do want to know for everybody listening that's, you know, everybody's very busy. And if they're a little overwhelmed with this whole topic, but it is very important to them and very important to lead and know that 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 bias in AI is being mitigated as best as possible. What's the one takeaway that people can just really latch onto and start doing or practicing now?
Yeah, I would say avail yourself of the tools that are out there, especially the models such as ChatGPT. Another really great one that's, I would think, the best responsible chatbot is Claude AI from Anthropic. They really put in a lot of controls in terms of making sure the outputs are responsible. Then there's, you know, the Google version of Gemini that, of course, you probably have seen if you have a Google Workspace. You've got those tools available to you. And then if you're a Microsoft shop, you've got Copilot available to you through that suite. And then there's open source, such as the Meta model for Llama and what they have offering. So I think it's just trying some of these things. And I remember the first time that I, put something into Chat GPT, I was like, I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal? Like this is, I don't see what this is supposed to do for me. And I think it's just trying to keep at it and talk to that tool as if it were your assistant or your teammate, and really just ask it, what you need. And if it's not giving you what you want, then try to ask it to give it to you in a different way. And it's just just that practice. May seem a little bit strange at first, but I think just getting into the habit of maybe logging on. They're all free, and you can have paid versions, of course, if you want the more robust functionality. But just to start doing that if you haven't already. I think that's just a great way to get started.
Yeah. And then lastly, what's one way also to mitigate bias? Either to mitigate it or just to be aware of it
Mm.
when we're getting the output, just to put on
Yes.
that lens or have that filter.
Yeah, good point. Very good point. And that's going back to kind of what we were saying, to be a critical thinker, not a skeptic per se, but just taking the output and always checking it, reading through it. I mean, I'm sure there are people, who, and I have been guilty of this before, of, like looking at the output, reading the first few sentences and like, oh, wow, this sounds really good. And remembering that the technology, it's actually a probability technology. So it's just giving you kind of like what would be the next logical word that comes after the word before it. So it's not necessarily factual or accurate. It does, take information from the internet. So there can be some really good ideas and thoughts that it spits back out to you, but you do need to read and to make sure, is this actually correct? Because I, for example, used it the other day, and it started putting in things about me that I had never done. And I was like, well, I sound really great, and if I hadn't done that, I hadn't read it thoroughly and I just copied and pasted into, what I was doing and not reviewed it, then, that would have been probably confusing to my readers, because they'd say, we didn't know that you did that. So it does, it tries to please you at the end of the day, but you have to have that critical thinking hat on and make sure to be the human in the loop and read back and review the outputs that it gives. And that includes the bias, because I'll just give you one example. I'm sure if you tried this, if you put in, to Dolly, which is the image creation, oh, give me a CEO of a company. Typically, it's always going to be a male. You're going to have that picture. Now, I think, they're trying to put more data in there to balance it out. I don't know if we did that test today, what we would get, but just, you can even do that yourself. And try it and see what you get. And then just wonder, like, is that really representative, or is that biased based upon the past, 100 years? The majority of the CEOs have been male.
Mhm.
And do we want to continue to propagate that bias going forward, or do we want to try to level the playing field? So that's just something to think about, is that the data coming in is going to be what the AI technology uses to then provide your output.
Yeah, so good to know. So it's almost like, well, hopefully this won't be too controversial, but it seems kind of like Fox News. You watch it and
Mhm.
then you think about, what do I take as face value and what do I really want to think about or look up to verify?
Of
So
course.
that is such an important reminder. So, Sarah, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I know this topic is a lot deeper and a lot wider. If you have any more questions or how to incorporate a responsible AI and mitigate bias in your organization, Sarah would be an amazing resource. Thank you for taking your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Cheryl. It's been a pleasure. And thanks, everyone.